I speak to you as someone who has tested, measured, and observed for decades. Words are instructions for the brain. When I describe a scene in detail, I am not just telling a story. I am issuing commands that your nervous system takes seriously. That is why, in this chapter, I ask you to imagine a lemon, cold in your hand, oily skin, strong smell, cut in half. When you bit it in your mind, your mouth filled with saliva, even though there was no lemon in front of you, simple words changed your physiology in seconds. Now, think about what this means for your daily life. If a guided description can make your salivary glands work, what about the phrases you repeat to yourself every day? The brain does not debate intentions. It records and executes. When you read or hear "I am biting a lemon," it organizes responses consistent with that information. This is how language produces real effects in the body, even when the scene is only imagined. That is why I propose what I call mental cleansing. Radical attention to the vocabulary you feed your brain. Children play a game at the table, describing food in disgusting ways until someone loses their appetite. Adults do the same with their own lives, saying, "This gives me a headache, it's a nuisance, it's useless, it's not harmless." Repeated often, these sentences condition inner responses and erode enthusiasm. The wrong word, over time, becomes an emotional habit. The body naturally seeks health, but it is not indifferent to constant verbal bombardment. When you ask for pain with conviction, the brain learns the pathway and, over time, prepares the response you have rehearsed with your tongue. The same applies to tiredness, discouragement, and giving up too soon. Remember, what you repeat, you plant. What you plant, you harvest. Changing the verbal script is the first step to changing the biological script. There are two decisive amplifiers here, the mental level and emotion. In alpha and theta, words carry much more power. When spoken with feeling, they reach even further. This explains why some affirmations take root like good seeds, while others grow into weeds. From this point on, we must learn to choose phrases that program results, not problems. In doing so, you train the brain to create what you desire, not what you fear. When I understood that words mobilize the body as if they were reality, I saw that every phrase we use is a seed. We plant in the soil of the mind expressions that can bear fruits of health or illness, of hope or discouragement. Saying "I can't" is like watering a plant of failure every day. Saying "I will find a way" is like cultivating perseverance. The soil is always fertile, but it is up to us to decide what we allow to take root. Everyday examples abound. You may have noticed how some people, when talking about themselves, carry a heavy tone. "I am unlucky. This always happens to me. I'll never get better." These words, when repeated, install programs in the mind that end up being followed precisely. Just as the lemon produced saliva, these sentences produce states of mind and decisions that reinforce the original belief. On the other hand, I have also seen students transform their lives with small changes in vocabulary. Instead of repeating "I'm tired," they begin to say, "I need energy, and I will find it now." At first, it seemed like just a change in wording, but soon the body reacted differently. The word created an expectation of vitality, and the mind found ways to fulfill it. It was as if the organism remained loyal to the command it had been given. This is the secret many ignore. The brain does not distinguish between a phrase spoken in jest and a phrase spoken seriously. It records them all. That is why I warn about being cautious with expressions of discouragement, even those used in casual conversation. When you repeat them, you reinforce neural pathways that become more and more automatic. An innocent phrase, over the years, can shape destiny. From this point on, I began to teach that we must become gardeners of the mind. What we say to ourselves and to others must be chosen as carefully as one selects precious seeds. If you want to reap health, speak of health. If you want success, speak of success. If you want love, speak of love. It is simple, yet powerful. Words do not stay in the air. They sink into the soil of the mind and bear inevitable fruit. When I first began my experiments, my concern was with my children. I wanted them to be better students, more attentive and confident. I noticed that when I used words of encouragement, they responded much more positively. Saying, "You are capable, concentrate," produced very different results from "You never learn." Words did not just reflect an opinion, they shaped behavior and self-perception. In the classroom, I observed something similar. Teachers who constantly use criticism and negative labels created in their students an atmosphere of fear and insecurity. On the other hand, those who praised effort, highlighted achievements, and showed confidence developed students who were more motivated and willing to face challenges. In this case, words functioned as tools of stimulation or of blockage. This led me to understand that every child is programming their future based on the phrases they hear. "You are stupid," repeated many times, installs itself in the mind as truth. "But you are intelligent. Keep trying" creates a foundation of self-confidence that can accompany them throughout life. That is why, I insist, parents and teachers carry an immense responsibility with the words they use daily. It is no exaggeration to say that a single word can change the course of a life. I have seen young people recover their motivation simply because someone believed in them and said it aloud. A simple phrase of encouragement, repeated in difficult moments, acts as a mental anchor, reminding the person that they are capable. Often, what was missing was not intelligence or skill, but the right word at the right time. That is why I use words of empowerment as if you were handing out tools. Every "you can" opens a door, every "keep going" extends a bridge, and every "I believe in you" plants confidence in the heart. This is one of the greatest powers we have as human beings, the power to influence minds through the sound of our voice. Knowing how to use this power is to build, not to destroy. Over time, I realized that most people are unaware of how much they harm themselves by repeating negative phrases automatically. Words like "this makes me furious," "I'm not lucky," or "this pain will stay with me forever" may seem harmless, but they work as direct orders to the brain. And since the brain does not distinguish between a joke and a command, it executes what it hears, adjusting body and emotion to comply. One example I often highlight is that of people who, when saying "this food will make me sick," actually feel sick after eating it. It is not magic, it is programming. The mind, conditioned by words, prepares the body to respond according to the verbalized belief. In this way, we create illnesses, limitations, and failures without realizing that we ourselves gave the initial order. The same happens with those who keep repeating, "I'm tired, I have no energy, I never achieve anything." Each repetition strengthens a neural pathway, and the body begins to accept that state as natural. What was once just a phrase turns into a habit, then into a conviction, and finally into reality. What began as language crystallizes into destiny. That is why I always recommend great care with the language used at home and at work. An environment where everyone reinforces negativity creates a field favorable to collective discouragement. On the other hand, when words circulate in a tone of confidence, hope, and encouragement, results change. Energy changes, and people's lives are transformed as a consequence. Learning to recognize these automatic phrases is the first step. Consciously replacing them is the second. And practicing until the new language becomes natural is the third. This simple sequence has the power to reprogram the mind and, with it, change physical and emotional conditions. It all begins with the decision to no longer use words against yourself. From the beginning of my research, I discovered that words have the same effect as a password. When spoken, they open or close doors in the unconscious. It is not just about external communication. It is an internal code. Every time you repeat an affirmation, you are programming your mind to act according to that instruction. Just as a computer responds to written commands, the brain responds to verbal commands. That is why I included in Silva Method training the conscious use of positive phrases, repeated in a state of deep relaxation. When you reach the alpha level, the mind becomes more receptive, and words penetrate like seeds into fertile soil. What is planted in that state tends to grow faster and produce more lasting fruits. This is true mental programming. A simple example I teach is to replace "I don't want to be sick" with "I want to be healthy." The first phrase still carries the image of illness, which continues to influence the subconscious. The second, instead, creates an image of health, guiding body and mind toward the desired direction. The difference may seem small, but the results are completely different. I also insist that it is not enough to merely repeat a phrase mechanically. You must feel its truth, add emotion, and visualize the result. The word is the trigger, but emotion is the fuel. When the two come together, the mind accepts the command as real and begins to work silently to make it concrete. Thus, we understand that there is no neutrality in what we say. Every word is a program that installs itself either for good or for harm. It is up to each person to consciously choose which phrases they want to repeat until they become part of their identity. The mind records, organizes, and faithfully responds to what it hears. The secret is to learn to speak what you wish to live. Over time, I realized that words alone are already powerful, but they gain intensity when charged with emotion. Saying, "I will succeed" in a flat tone may have limited effect, but repeating the same phrase with conviction, enthusiasm, and deep feeling becomes an irresistible command for the subconscious. It is as if emotion were the electric current that gives life to words. In my trainings, I always insisted that students should not only speak, but feel what they were saying. Visualizing the result, imagining the joy of achieving it, and pouring emotion into that experience is what truly imprints the message at the deep mental level. Achieve that point, the mind no longer distinguishes between reality and imagination. It accepts as fact whatever has been intensely felt. This is how many transformed their health, their studies, and even their personal relationships. Words accompanied by positive emotion reprogram attitudes, awaken confidence, and mobilize energy. The entire body responds. Hormones, heartbeat, vitality, everything begins to align with what has been affirmed with faith and feeling. On the other hand, I also observed how words filled with fear, anger, or resentment create destruction. When someone repeats negative phrases in a state of intense emotion, the effect is even faster and deeper. The mind registers them as absolute truth and begins to produce results consistent with that vibration. The danger lies precisely in the strength of the feeling that accompanies the word. That is why I teach that we must use emotion as an ally. It is not about ignoring difficulties, but about consciously choosing which feeling to place in our affirmations. If you desire health, speak of health with joy. If you desire success, speak of it with enthusiasm. The union of the right word with the right emotion is the secret for the mind to accept, record, and transform your life. I discovered throughout my life that not only the words we say to ourselves have power, but also those we hear constantly. The verbal environment in which we grow up or live acts as silent programming, entering the subconscious without asking permission. A child who repeatedly hears "you are worthless" or "you will never succeed" carries those marks for years, often without realizing it. On the other hand, environments where phrases of support, encouragement, and confidence circulate produce people who are stronger, more secure, and more open to learning. I saw this in my own family and in the students I trained. When someone begins to surround themselves with positive words, behavior naturally changes. It is like breathing pure air instead of polluted air. The body is grateful and the mind blossoms. Many times, we have no control over what we hear from others, but we do have control over what we repeat internally. This is the key I teach. Even in the face of external criticism, it is possible to create an internal dialogue that cancels out harmful effects. By replacing discouraging phrases with declarations of confidence, the mind learns not to accept everything from outside as truth. One example I like to mention is of people who, when entering new environments, bring with them an elevated vocabulary. They not only change their own reality, but also that of those who listen to them. A single word of encouragement in the midst of pessimism can be enough to reverse the mood of an entire group. This shows that words are not only individual, but social. They shape not just one person, but entire communities. That is why I always recommend take care of the language you use at home, at work, and among friends. Every phrase released into the environment is a seed that can germinate in someone's mind. If you want to build a better world, start by choosing the words you put into circulation. The verbal environment we create today will become the destiny of the next generations. One of the most effective practices I teach in the Silva Method is the conscious replacement of negative words with positive ones. This does not mean denying reality, but rather choosing how to describe it in a way that directs the mind toward the solution. Instead of repeating, "I am in pain," I say, "I am in the process of recovery." Instead of "I can't," I say, "I am learning." Reality remains present, but language changes the direction of mental energy. This principle works because the brain operates with images. When you say, "I don't want to be sick," you still keep illness in your mental picture. But when you affirm, "I want to be healthy," you create the image of health, which is the true objective. In this way, the mind begins to work silently to bring the body closer to that condition. It is like adjusting the rudder of a ship. The right word guides the entire journey. I have seen many students achieve significant changes simply by replacing words. A man who always said, "I am unlucky," began to affirm, I am becoming more and more aware of my opportunities. Little by little, his behavior changed. He noticed situations he once ignored, and his life took a different direction. The word was the starting point for a visible transformation. The replacement must be constant. It is not enough to change a phrase today and return to the old one tomorrow. It is repetition that creates new pathways in the mind. Each time we use the new word, we strengthen the desired trail until it becomes natural and automatic. This way, we build a language that works for us, not against us. That is why I always insist, do not allow your mouth to be an instrument of self. Turn it into a tool of creation. Every word replaced is a new brick in your life. Over time, the entire castle rises differently stronger and more beautiful. And it all began with a simple decision to choose better the words you pronounce. When teaching the Silva method, I never wanted people to simply believe in theory. That is why I propose simple exercises that show, in practice, how words affect the mind and body. One of them is to repeat a positive phrase in a state of deep relaxation, such as, every day, in every way, I am getting better, better, and better. By practicing this daily, the mind records the message and begins to produce results aligned with it. Another exercise is to immediately replace any negative phrase that arises. If you say, I am tired, then correct it right away. I am recovering and gaining energy. This practice creates the habit of not allowing harmful words to settle in the subconscious. Little by little, the brain learns to accept only commands that strengthen it, not those that weaken it. I also recommend writing strengthening phrases on cards and keeping them visible in your wallet, on your desk, on the mirror. Visual repetition reinforces mental programming, helping to gradually replace old patterns of language. What we see frequently is absorbed by the mind just as much as what we hear. A powerful exercise is to practice visualization together with the word. If you say, I am healthy, imagine yourself healthy, full of energy, smiling, carrying out your activities with vitality. The image and the word form an inseparable pair that the subconscious accepts as reality and, little by little, turns into fact. These exercises may seem simple, but they are like seeds planted every day. Over time, they sprout into mental habits that create new life conditions. The secret is not in complexity, but in consistency. Those who practice daily discover that the mind, when well directed by the right words, is capable of changing any destiny. Now we reach the essential point. Words are not just sounds that vanish into the air, but creative forces that shape destinies. When I understood this, I dedicated my life to teaching that every phrase is a brick placed in the construction of life. Some people build walls of limitation without realizing it, simply because they repeat negative phrases. Others build bridges of hope because they have learned to use words as instruments of creation. That is why I insist that you pay close attention to the vocabulary you use with yourself and with others. Ask yourself, do my words strengthen or weaken? Do they build or destroy? The answer to these questions reveals much about the path your life has been taking. By changing words, you also begin to change the course of your story. There is no neutrality. Every phrase leaves a mark. What you repeat frequently installs itself as a program in the subconscious, and that program determines attitudes, emotions, and results. If you want to transform reality, begin by transforming your language. This is the simplest and, at the same time, the most powerful key I discovered in decades of work. I have sought to show that a single word, spoken with emotion and reinforced in a deep mental state, is enough to alter your body, your mind, and your life. Experiments like the lemon, examples of destructive and constructive phrases, and practices of conscious replacement all point to the same conclusion. Words are energy shaped into sound. I want you to take this as a practical lesson. Choose words that express what you want to live. Plant health, hope, courage, and love in every phrase, and repeat them until the mind accepts and transforms them into reality. In this way, with the power of words allied to the Silva method, you will discover that life is not a matter of chance, but of conscious creation, and that your mouth can be the most powerful tool to transform the world in which you live.